Welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Excuse me. I'm Dr. Ben.
And I'm Dr. Susanna.
And we are both naturopathic doctors who empower you to heal yourself through whole food plant-based nutrition, as well as mind-body medicine. And today we're excited to talk about healing your lungs, specifically preventing and potentially reversing or stopping the progression of chronic lung conditions like COPD. That includes chronic bronchitis and emphysema, as well as asthma, which is, of course, more common in children, but often also develops in adults. So we're going to be talking all about that stuff and some really empowering science around whole food plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine in general. And lots of good stuff to cover.
Definitely. Yeah. So in starting our lung conversation today, and as a reminder, this is just one episode in our series of Alter Your Health from Head to Toe. And this week we are on the lungs. But, when we're talking about lung health and lung conditions, I think, it's really interesting to consider that lung disease, chronic lung disease, has become the third leading medical cause of death in the United States.
Behind heart disease and cancer.
Behind heart disease and cancer. Yeah. And if we look at, and that's mainly talking about COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. Disease. But when we look at the other two common lung conditions that afflict Americans, it's lung cancer and asthma. And I think some of the numbers here are just, kind of staggering, that lung cancer kills 130,000 Americans a year, and COPD kills 160,000 Americans per year. So, it's not a small portion of the population. These are big numbers.
Yeah. And I remember kind of growing up and having that kind of just that picture of the old person using oxygen. And that's just kind of, even throughout medical training and stuff, I saw chronic lung conditions as something that, very unfortunate. And I didn't really know that there was a way to treat it or address what was going on. Of course, with asthma, we can use bronchodilating inhalers to open up the airways and stuff. But with regard to kind of the later stage COPD, that causes people to not be able to oxygenate because, taking a step back, that's what our lungs are doing for us. They're oxygenating our blood essentially so that we can, bring that oxygen to all of our tissues in our body. And if we're not oxygenating our blood properly, then we're going to have low blood oxygen saturation. You can measure on a pulse oximeter, and that's not a good thing for the health of the rest of our body. And of course, then it's like, okay, well, you get on supplemental oxygen. But like I was saying, it's like, what else can you do? And I didn't really know any of this stuff. Of course, I think about living a healthy lifestyle and, avoiding the common, obvious exposures to environmental toxins and air pollution. And let's face it, cigarette smoking or the inhalation of any sort of smoke is going to be damaging to our lung tissue. So it's like, yeah, we can do all these kind of common sense things to prevent ourselves from getting these conditions. But the science specifically around whole food plant-based nutrition that supports the stopping the progression and potentially the reversal of a lot of these conditions is pretty amazing.
Totally. Yes. So today we're going to talk just really briefly about lung cancer. We're going to talk about COPD, and we're going to talk about asthma. Asthma's not as big of a killer, but it certainly affects our quality of life if we have asthma in a major way.
No, a lot of people,
3,000 a year die of asthma. So that's substantial as well.
When someone has an asthma attack, they can't breathe.
Right.
And if they can't breathe without their bronchodilating inhaler, then death is a real potential.
It's totally life-threatening. Yeah. It's so true. Yeah. And, I guess just to also put it into context a little bit more, it's funny because in the series From Head to Toe, we've really talked a lot about the importance of the circulatory system, right? Because it's the circulatory system that circulates oxygen throughout the body.
And other nutrients.
Yes.
And removing waste.
It does so much. But, that oxygen is really, really key for the health and survival of our cells and tissues. Yeah. And so, really what comes before circulatory health is lung health, because we need to make sure that we've got good oxygen saturation.
Yeah.
So anyway, you already mentioned, Dr. Ben, smoking. And yes, I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that smoking really is the biggest risk factor in the development of lung cancer and COPD.
That's obvious.
That's
and
obvious.
We can just clump smoking into just the inhalation or the breathing of toxins, which, we always talk about as being kind of impossible to be breathing clean, pristine air. But just as a reminder, the best air that we can find is in nature, amidst forested areas where there's lots of trees and vegetation, because trees and plants in general are nature's air purification systems. And with regard to indoor air, having a HEPA filter, or opening our windows and house plants, and being mindful of the off-gassing chemicals and environmental toxins and cleaning products and things that we might be just breathing in without really even knowing it or sensing it or smelling it or feeling it. These kind of things can accumulate and really, in the end, kind of damage our lung tissue and contribute to chronic lung conditions.
Right. Yeah. And specifically, what is so harmful in smoke, cigarette smoke, but also air pollution are the free radicals, the other constituents that also lead to oxidative damage in the lung tissue, and also that suppress the immune system. So, when we have increased oxidative damage, we are going to have increased DNA damage, and that leads to the proliferation of cancer, but so does a suppressed immune system, because it really is our immune system that's responsible for helping to keep cancerous cells and cancer growth in check.
Yeah, it's so common to kind of, really make things really complicated, but I love the way you just put that simply. It's just, oxidative stress, and which dysregulates immune function and causes systemic inflammation. And these buzzwords: oxidative damage, stress, free radicals, antioxidants, inflammation, immune balancing, like that's really what it all comes down to. So doesn't have to be too much more complicated than that.
Yeah. So when we think about what we can do, how we can take action, especially in our diet, to prevent lung cancer and also to support the healing of lung cancer, we look at our plant-based diet. And then, it's really interesting. It's important to know that although eating whole food plant-based is the most antioxidant rich way that you could possibly eat, it's of course not going to neutralize or negate the effects of like smoking or continuing to live an oxidative lifestyle, right?
I actually remember seeing some study, like I remember someone showing me the study about like smoking and drinking orange juice or something like that. Some study where
there's a lot of studies like that.
Yeah, where it shows how just a good nutrient dense, antioxidant rich plant-based meal or beverage or supplement really offsets to some degree the free radical damage that we have. But of course, I know what you're saying is that rather than kind of fighting this uphill battle and kind of killing ourselves and trying to prolong our survival and killing ourselves and prolong our survival, we need to just work on the thriving and surviving rather than and stop killing ourselves.
Exactly. And the study that I was going to refer to was a study on broccoli.
Okay.
And it showed that individuals who, they were like long-term smokers that ate 25 times more broccoli than the average American, which is really only like one stalk of broccoli a day. These people ate one stalk of broccoli a day and saw a 41% decrease in their oxidative damage or their DNA damage.
These are people who are smoking.
These are people who are smokers. Okay. Yes. And, there's another really interesting study that looked at kale and smokers, and it was measuring the antioxidant level in the blood between smokers that ate kale and non-smokers that ate kale. And it was really interesting that the antioxidant level was so much lower in the smokers that ate kale. And the reasoning that that they reasoned from that study is because when we smoke, we just work through our antioxidants so much faster, right? Because we need that neutralization.
Totally.
So yes, I mean, to some extent, it helps if someone's going to continue smoking. But yeah, we really need to remove the main obstacle, right? The main factor, the main cause of the issue
So
first, right?
prevent, obviously with any, just wrapping up the cancer conversation, it's all about prevention. It's all about living that, antioxidant rich lifestyle, meaning also reducing our oxidative damage. And yeah, of course, a lot more can be said about kind of the management or treatment of cancer.
Yes,
but
that's for like a whole nother day
or
several
month.
days. Yes, it's a big conversation. But yeah, the one last thing I'd say about cancer and the research done in plant-based nutrition is that it's also shown that this high antioxidative load helps prevent metastasis as well. So that's helpful information for people who may have gotten a cancer diagnosis and are feeling like, oh, there's not much I can do. Well, there is something that you can do, and
there's a lot.
The sooner that you do really clean up the diet to support the immune system and increase the antioxidative load, the better.
The last thing I'd say about cancer is it's so helpful to stop creating cancer. So of course, we think about, how can we kill the cancer? How can we cut it out, poison it, whatever? But like all those conventional strategies for cancer treatment, they can be really effective, of course. But the thing that we need to also do is stop creating the environment for cancer cells to be produced and thrive. So that means, again, cleaning up the diet and lifestyle.
Right. Okay, so moving on to COPD, and the antioxidant conversation extends over to COPD as well.
Yeah, maybe we should explain what COPD is real quick. Okay.
Yeah.
So COPD includes conditions like chronic bronchitis and eczema, emphysema. Those are the most common kind of forms of COPD, and it's essentially the breakdown of the alveoli. The alveoli are those little sacs within the lungs, and that's the site of oxygen exchange or gas exchange. So if we break down those alveoli sacs, which are like, cellular, microscopic structures, we start breaking them down, we're no longer very efficient in exchanging gases, and it's going to lead to decreased oxygenation potential. So we're going to be able to breathe just fine, ventilate just fine, exchange air, and we don't have any breathing issues per se. We're not necessarily going to be wheezing, or like, there's no constriction or restriction of our breath, but the actual potential to exchange gases is diminished.
Well, yes. And as the disease progresses, breathing can become more difficult, especially the exhale becomes more difficult. So people
in chronic bronchitis, I remember that's the blue bloater where they're filled up with air and not able to exhale completely.
Yeah. And in chronic bronchitis, there's this kind of thickening and inflammation of the airways that also usually involves being plugged up with lots of thick mucus.
So what's causing this?
But what's important, what I want to acknowledge is that permanent scarring is associated with both of these conditions, emphysema and chronic bronchitis.
Yeah.
And when that permanent scarring happens, the scarring can't be reversed. However, what can be improved with lifestyle and diet is overall pulmonary function.
Right.
So what can be done? There is a really cool study where 120 people with COPD were studied, and half was... So 60 of those people were in the control group, 60 of those people were in the intervention group. And the people in the intervention group were simply instructed to eat one extra serving of fruits and vegetables every day. That's it, just one extra serving. And over the next 3 years, the control group, it showed that they got worse. Their pulmonary function got worse. And that's generally what's expected with COPD, right? That's just the prognosis. It just gets worse. But we see that in the intervention group, the people who ate just one extra serving of fruits and vegetables a day, they didn't get worse. And actually, there was a mild improvement in their pulmonary function. And I mean, the reason why there's so much excitement in my voice is because this does go against the typical narrative or the typical prognosis that people are told when they're diagnosed with COPD.
And so many other conditions, right?
Yes, and so many other conditions.
That's because, and it's not surprising because, again, like I think you already said, COPD is again due to the oxidative damage and destruction of those cellular structures from the inflammation and oxidative stress that occurs within the lung. So those extra plants, those extra fruits and vegetables, even though it was just one measly little serving, that's going to be more antioxidants. And I guess it's also maybe helpful at this point to say when people are eating one additional serving of fruits and vegetables, they're eating one less serving of the processed foods or the animal products that might have more of those pro-oxidative properties. So it's like we're exchanging the pro-oxidative properties for the processed foods and the chemical fillers and of course environmental toxins that are accumulated in the animal products. We're exchanging those pro-oxidants with antioxidative phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals in our whole plant foods.
Exactly.
Good exchange.
For those who are interested, that was a 2010 study from the European Respiratory Journal. But I think like what you were also saying, Ben, is with meat has been confirmed as a pro-oxidant. And actually it was confirmed in a Harvard study that especially cured meats like bacon and bologna and ham and hot dogs are a risk factor for COPD. And that's thought to be due to the nitrates in those foods that mimic the harmful nitrates in cigarette smoke. A little more nuanced, but also all the other pro-inflammatory compounds in those foods, right?
Yeah, oxidative stress, inflammation, like we know that. We know that. Even though I guess thanks for saying it though, because there is obviously a big push to eat more meat and less plants all the time. Like that, right. that narrative exists in full force today. It always has. But of course, the research on a lot of these conditions is not supporting those choices so much.
No. Eat your anti-inflammatory diet and load up on bacon.
Yeah, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that.
That is what some anti-inflammatory diets include, right? Quotes. Yeah. Quotes. I had quotes up when I said that.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that. But of course, there's always going to be people who, we always like, quick tangent. It's always helpful to consider managing conditions with nutrition versus reversing conditions with nutrition. Because if we're, that's enough to say for now.
Okay, let's go on to asthma. And asthma is a different story because, tobacco is not the major risk factor in the development of asthma. Asthma is more often due to an immune imbalance and chronic allergies that kind of trigger that hyperreactivity and inflammation in the lungs. However, similar to COPD and cancer, oxidative damage is thought to be a major player in the pathogenesis of asthma. And so there's also, some really interesting studies that, conclude that the more antioxidants you eat in your diet, the less of a risk you have for developing asthma, and also the less of a chance you will exacerbate asthma. And there was an interesting study. I actually don't have it right in front of me, but I'm remembering it right now because we're going over the research in this episode. And the study actually took servings of fruits and vegetables away from the diet from people who had asthma. And what was shown is that their pulmonary function decreased and they had more asthma attacks. But I think the study I'd like to highlight more on asthma is a really interesting study. It's an older study from 1985, but it's a really interesting study. And it's the only study that really looks at a population of people who were put on specifically a plant-based diet, a vegan diet. We don't know if it was whole food or not, but
probably in 1985.
I would hope so.
More whole food than one would be today.
Right. But in this study, 35 patients with severe asthma, and, they really had to qualify as severe asthma. The average duration of the diagnosis was, 12 years. Average medications they were on for asthma was 4.5. They were instructed to go on a vegan diet for 1 year. And only 24 people stuck with the diet. I guess they lost a few people. The vegan diet is just too hard, which it isn't. And we love teaching people how it's not. But yeah, 24 people stuck with the diet. And after 1 year, 92% of participants reported improvement in their asthma. The average consumption of medicine went from 4.5 to 1.2. And many of those people were able to come off of their medicine altogether.
Pretty cool. It's some things that we've definitely seen. And, with regard to asthma, you were talking about, of course, how whole plant foods and the nutrient dense whole plant foods, with their antioxidants and whatnot, quench those free radicals that are often associated with that disease. But just as important, the removal of those, toxins and food proteins and products that are disrupting our microbiome and leading to increased gut permeability and, activating the immune response in that way and perpetuating immune dysfunction is really an important thing to consider as well with regard to balancing the immune system and reversing immune related conditions such as asthma, as well as allergies or anything else. So important. So our fiber-rich whole plant foods that are low in toxicity and high in nutrients and fiber, so important for healing the gut health. We always generally comes up in every one of our podcast conversations, right?
Totally. Yeah, but I want to say one more thing that's so interesting that I came across in my researching is that there's a focus on how helpful polyphenols are. And polyphenols are a very, it's one type of antioxidant, or it's kind of a category of antioxidants. And it's been shown that polyphenols can actually bind onto allergic compounds and neutralize them or render them hypoallergenic. So this is then going to inhibit that activation of the allergic response, which is often such a major factor in an asthmatic kind of episode, right? So I found that super interesting, and researchers further went on to study whether taking isolated forms of polyphenols helped in the treatment of asthma. And the results showed that they really didn't help that much, that it's the whole foods and the synergistic effect of not only the polyphenols, but all the other important nutrients in the whole foods that create that protective effect and that balancing effect in relationship to allergies, but so much else,
That's obviously a very important and helpful message, and I think it's sad because everyone is looking for the magic pill, and it's like, what can we put into a capsule, and then buy and swallow and heal ourselves with? And it just simply doesn't work that way. If it did, there would be way more dollars funded for nutritional research, and the fact is that whole plant foods and farmers don't receive a lot of a big budget for nutritional research. It's the nutritional supplement and of course the pharmaceutical companies that fund most of the nutritional research.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, whole foods over pills is essentially the most important thing that I take away from that message, and something that we're preaching all the time.
Yeah. Well, was there anything that you wanted to bring in, Ben, about breath specifically?
Well, I in approaching this lung conversation, I just thought that, talking about breathing is really important. But that being said, we have talked previously. We've covered breath and air quality and breath quality in more depth in other podcast episodes. So maybe we'll link back to those. But since we're just on the topic real briefly, just as a reminder, if you didn't already know, breath should be coming in through the nose. Our nose is designed for breathing, of course, unless we're talking or eating or using our mouth or also exercising where we need to take in more air because our mouth is bigger than our nostrils. So we can actually move more air through our mouth. But just resting and relaxed, we should be using our nose for breathing, which of course is filtering all of the toxins and chemicals and pollutants in our environment. And then that breath should be coming into our full lungs, into the base of our lungs. Our lungs are about 6 liters in capacity, and that's like a huge volume. But when we're just hanging out, resting, we're using about half of a liter or 1/12 of our total lung capacity. So if you could imagine, most people are breathing just into the top 12th of their lungs, just right into the upper chest, and moving that air into the upper chest. And we want to use our full muscles of breathing, our diaphragm, and breathe into our belly and move that air all the way down into our belly. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking more of a deep breath, but it means moving our breath more deep into our body, if that makes sense. And then, of course, that's going to help, circulate the air better and keep our muscles of breathing in better shape, and also help to regulate our autonomic nervous system, which is so important. When we're activating our diaphragm, we're sending a message to our brain via the vagus nerve that everything's okay, and we can be more in that parasympathetic state of the autonomic nervous system that's associated with relaxation and healing. So those are kind of the basics around breathing, and of course, all those principles and practices and whatnot are very relevant in the prevention and reversal of conditions like COPD, asthma, and any other lung-related condition.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, if it's okay, I just wanted to wrap up with an inspiring story from one of our clients, a little client testimonial.
Real quick.
Because, like we kind of said in previous episodes, we don't specialize in one kind of area. Like, right, we're not lung specialists, we're not thyroid specialists. We work with everyone. And it's so amazing to see that when people focus on their lifestyle and foundation of health, healing happens in all organ systems. And so we've got a pulmonary success story here. And this is from Stella. And you can actually watch a testimonial video of her on our website. But she writes here, "I will forever be grateful for the sharing of wisdom, encouragement, and support I received from the Thrive on Plants community and Dr. Ben and Susanna in my post-cancer life. In early 2020, I embarked on a multitude of challenges, cleanses, weekly podcasts, and inspirational community meetings offered by the altars that were instrumental in bringing my body into alignment with better health. By mid-year, I had lost 45 pounds with what seemed like little effort. I tried many new fruit and vegetables, seeds, nuts, and supplements. My new pantry is filled with foods that nourish my body instead of those filled with toxins that weighed me down. Most importantly, my doctor was thrilled with the internal changes reflected in my blood work. She took me off metformin for diabetes. She took me off high blood pressure pills and my very expensive asthma medication. My A1C levels dropped out of the diabetic range. My blood pressure stabilized to normal function, or to the normal range. And there was a great improvement in lung health."
Awesome.
Yeah,
such an inspiring story. And again, not a surprise. These things tend to happen when we create the environment for health to thrive within us. So thanks so much for coming along this journey as you support and empower yourself in healing your lungs through how you're eating and living.
Yes, and if you're looking for more support, more inspiration, you can head over to www.alter.health and learn more about how we work with people and support individuals in healing themselves.
All right. Peace and love, you guys. We'll see you.